I feel like I picked the ideal time to read Inferno Squad, having come right off the back of finishing Rebel Rising, then watching Rogue One and the original trilogy. Inferno Squad ties up one final loose end, which to be honest I hadn't realised was there until I read the book. From the end of Rogue One, I always assumed that since the rebels were now directly fighting the Empire, Saw Gerrera's partisans had ceased to exist and just joined with the Rebel Alliance. However, Inferno Squad shows that while most of the partisans may have done that, there were a few who were still too hardcore for the Rebel Alliance and still carried on their partisan ways. These were the Dreamers, carrying on Saw Gerrera's dream of fighting the Empire without limitations even after his death. Inferno Squad starts during the Battle of Yavin, where Iden Versio is fighting the rebels in her TIE fighter when she strays too far from the Death Star and manages to avoid its destruction. After escaping the rebels on Yavin 4, she makes it back to Imperial space, where her father, Admiral Versio, decides to create Inferno Squad, a crack team of the best of Imperial agents to fight these so-called Dreamers. It's a good concept, and the book felt like Mission Impossible to me. Most of the book follows Inferno Squad as they go undercover and infiltrate various events, ranging from a party which really reminded me of the first Mission Impossible film, to what the bulk of the book is actually about, infiltrating the Dreamers and finding out who is leaking them their intel. It was refreshing to have the story follow Imperials rather than Rebels or Jedi. In fact, it reminded me of Death Star for that exact reason, although where the characters in Death Star eventually come to realise that the Empire is evil, Inferno Squad is completely made up of balls to the wall, loyal Imperials, people who would live and die for the Empire. It's an interesting flip, and I enjoyed reading the events from the point of view of loyal Imperials. I enjoyed the characters too, and Inferno Squad themselves are good, with Iden having mummy and daddy issues, all while trying to keep an entire undercover team together, which in itself becomes increasingly difficult as Gideon Hask constantly improvises without orders. I was quite curious about Gideon because as soon as I saw the name Gideon Hask, I went straight to my copy of The Phantom Affair to check the name, but it's not the same person. Loka Hask was the bad guy in that comic, but considering they're roughly the same age and with the same surname, both Imperials, and Gideon Hask does show some sadistic tendencies towards the end of the book, I have to wonder if his character was at least inspired by Loka Hask. Del Meeko and Sain Marana were interesting enough, each having their own unique role in Inferno Squad and each having separate stories when they managed to infiltrate the Dreamers. About halfway through their mission, I started to get a feeling that one of the members of Inferno Squad was going to go native or get jungle fever, and I was right. I won't say who it was because if you've read it, you already know, and if you haven't, then there's no need to spoil the surprise. But what it escalates to, and when it culminated, it happened so quickly, and I couldn't stop reading because I had to know how this particular situation would be resolved. That particular part of the story had me hooked. Staven is the leader of the Dreamers, and he actually had a small role in Rebel Rising. He was the one who checked Jin's explosive device when Saw tested her and she failed. He even remarks that Sain reminds him of a girl who was one of Saw's partisans and even had a similar name, that character obviously being Jyn Erso. He seemed pretty decent in Rebel Rising, but in the 8 years or so since he explained to Jyn the importance of wiring an explosive correctly, he's become surly, bitter and withdrawn. It's ironic because in Rebel Rising he warned Jyn that the life of a partisan is dark and she mustn't let the darkness bring her down, but ultimately he allowed it to happen to himself. It does make sense though, because in Rebel Rising one of the characters that died on Inusagi was Maya, and she and Staven were in a relationship, and as a result of her loss, Staven became bitter. On top of that, the reason Maya died in Rebel Rising was that somebody from Saw's group had been leaking information to the Empire, and that explains why whenever there's even the slightest hint that one of the Dreamers might be an Imperial informant, Staven absolutely loses his shit. Christie Golden used the shadow of Maya's character to great effect in Inferno Squad. Even though her character is dead by the time of the events of Inferno Squad, her character still has a lot of presence, not only transforming Staven from the perfectly reasonable soldier he was in Rebel Rising to the leader of the Dreamers with as few inhibitions as Saw Gerrera himself, but she's also the Mentor's goddaughter. The Mentor is someone I enjoyed reading about, and apart from the Maya connection, I was curious exactly what the nature of his relationship with Staven was, although at the reveal of his true identity, I have to admit I did roll my eyes. I suppose it does fit in with the story and the characters, and does make a lot more sense than if it had just been some randomer, especially since all the clues were there. But the problem is the clues were in the Clone Wars cartoon, and I cannot stand that show. So I can't really fault the logic for it being that person, I just resent that the Clone Wars exists at all, but that's not Claudia Gray's fault. I thought Geosin, which was the base of the Dreamers, was a great addition to the Star Wars universe, and I thought it was really interesting to see a planet that's perpetually in half light. We've seen planets with twin suns or green skies and blue grass before, but never anything like this, and I thought it was an interesting inclusion. When I pictured everyone on Geosin in my mind, it always reminded me of Rogue One, because that movie seems to be quite dark and colourless, so it kind of worked thematically since this is the last of Saw Gerrera's partisans. Beneath the planet, there's a hidden feature in the guise of droids built by an ancient civilization, so ancient that the droids don't even use electricity and wiring, instead relying on crystals. I thought they were so good, alluding to a race that may or may not come back someday, and having the mystery of how the droids ran and what their purpose was something that really intrigued me throughout the book, and to be honest, I thought they would be part of a bigger storyline somewhere down the road. I thought they were good, I thought they were interesting, I thought they were going to go somewhere with the lore. Unfortunately though, Christie Golden killed off most of my interest in them in the last few pages by describing exactly what their purpose was, and I found it to be somewhat deflating after the way it was teased throughout the book, and I think it was a big missed opportunity for something a bit different to be done in the future. Specifically, what I mean by that is they could have been left there by a race from the unknown regions. I know Inferno Squad came out before Thrawn Alliances, but I see no reason why Disney couldn't have been planning forward, and where we had the Rakuten Infinite Empire and the Killiks in Legends, this was an ideal opportunity to have something like that in the new canon, but unfortunately that opportunity has been wasted. That's Pablo Hidalgo not doing his job properly yet again. And speaking of the last few pages, I thought the last page and a half before the epilogue was a fantastic bit of writing, showing the full amount of stress, suffering, loss, the weight of command and even commitment Iden had to endure and put forward throughout the book. The way Golden phrased those pages made it really hit home just how thin Iden had been stretched and how powerful her character really is to have endured it all while still managing to lead an undercover team. Apart from the ancient robots, the amount of lore in Inferno Squad was okay, if not great, considering it came out before Thrawn Alliances. Just like Rebel Rising, it references other books and movies without contradicting anything, and it has things like Tonneray wine and a quick joke about it concerning the fact that Alderaan had been recently destroyed, the fact that most people can't write, and that books with actual pages and ink are a rarity, and Golden even includes Otor's hub, which was the place Quinlan Vos was working undercover at the beginning of Golden's other canon book, Dark Disciple. I do think there's a big issue with the new novels in that I think they're never really building to anything. They always seem to be these self-contained, neatly wrapped up stories, and I'd like to see the universe really start expanding like it did nearly 30 years ago. Having said that, Inferno Squad was good on its own, but I have to acknowledge the fact that it is a prequel to the Battlefront II campaign. I haven't played Battlefront II, but this is the kind of thing I like to see, and not only does Inferno Squad lead into the future, it also draws from the past, heavily referencing Rebel Rising when it didn't need to, and I like that it did because it made it feel more connected to everything else. One minor note I have to mention because it really does piss me off is the fact that it's set before Twilight Company but has 2 in Roman numerals on its spine. That pisses me off no end because I can either put the book on my bookshelf in the correct order, in which case I would have to have Battlefront 2 coming before Battlefront 1, or I put them in numerical order but then they're out of chronological order. I know it's a small thing, but I wish they had just called it Battlefront Inferno Squad. That way I could have them in chronological order without being pissed off at the fact that 2 comes before 1. Overall, I did enjoy Inferno Squad. In the new canon, there have barely been any books that tell stories from a loyal Imperial's point of view. There was Lords of the Sith, but that was mostly from the point of view of the Free Ryloth movement, and when it wasn't, the book wasn't really about being a loyal Imperial, it was about being a Force user. Thrawn was told from his own point of view, but he's only a loyal Imperial because he made a deal with the Emperor, and he's not exactly normal considering his tactical genius. Lost Stars was like Death Star in that halfway through, Imperial started to realise how evil the Empire actually was. Tarkin was from a normal Imperial's point of view, even if he is very high in the Imperial hierarchy, so I think Inferno Squad is only the second book in the new canon to really tell a story from a loyal Imperial's point of view, and it was a nice change. And not only that, but Christie Golden really mixed it up by having it in a Mission Impossible style escapade. I feel like Christie Golden did a good job with the writing overall, and I thought the pacing was good. I was always interested and I couldn't tell what was going to happen next, and I was really hooked when one particular situation escalated. So yeah, I think Inferno Squad is a good book. It has a good story, good pacing, just good everything really, and I look forward to reading whatever Christie Golden does next, as well as the third Battlefront book.